Hello and welcome to tonight's event, Into the Heights. Tonight's event is part of Alexandria Library's celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. I will put a link in the chat box where you can find more great Hispanic heritage events this month and next month. Also, a quick reminder, there will be time for audience questions at the end of tonight's program. If you have questions for our speaker, feel free to put those in the chat box or the Q&A box at any time, and I will make sure she sees them. Now I would like to take a moment to introduce tonight's speaker. Kristen Mccleary is an associate professor of history at James Madison University. Her book manuscript, All the Cities a Stage, Theater and Society in Buenos Aires, Argentina, 1810 to 1820, is currently under review with the University of Pittsburgh Press. She has published a number of articles about urban and popular culture in Argentina and Uruguay. She has co-directed a study abroad program to Buenos Aires, Argentina since 2008, and she teaches about expressions of gender, popular and urban culture, film and representation, and power and society in Latin America and the Latinx United States. She understands cultural expression as a way in which marginalized social groups express their own identities and foment democratic change and inclusivity in ways that are often not identified in mainstream press or contemporary political discourse. Please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Dr. Kristen Mccleary.
Okay. You hear me? Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak about a movie that I really love and how it connects to my research and all of those things that you just talked about. So I'm going to try to keep this a little informal. I don't know if everyone has seen the movie who's here. I will probably give away some of the things that happen, but I don't think the content of the movie is what is so important as the kind of themes that the movie covers, and it is a musical. So I'm going to just go ahead and get started to talk about why I chose to talk about this movie, In the Heights, tonight for Hispanic Heritage Month. And I just started out with the iconic bridge that one drives over. I drove over this summer to get into the Heights, and Washington Heights here in Upper Manhattan will be the neighborhood that I'm talking about. So I also wanted to briefly start by mentioning a couple of things about Hispanic Heritage Month, and I will return to this theme at the end of my presentation. Hispanic Heritage Month actually started as a week, and I put here some of that language which that our President Johnson passed in 1968 to start celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. And I just think it's important for us to keep in mind that history, because it really started out as a week and it was paying attention to Central America and Mexico. Ronald Reagan expanded it to a month in 1988, and he was the president, but also from California. So Hispanic Heritage Month has some very Western roots. And I do think that's something to keep in mind as we move forward with this talk. I will return to the meaning of this month as we come back. I just included a couple iconic pictures of Frida Kahlo as well. And the film In the Heights briefly touches on some iconic figures, especially female figures of Latin America. Oops, okay, I already messed up here. All right, so this is a bit of an overview of my presentation. Again, I really envision this presentation as a conversation. I'm just starting to write and think about In the Heights. I think when Hannah contacted me for the presentation, I feel like it had just come out. And I don't think the controversies about the film were already known. So I've kind of shifted my presentation from the original presentation to talk about some of the themes that I find very important. And I did include some of discussion about what became a controversy. It was the film's lack of representation of Afro-Latino actors. So I do want to talk about that as we go. I'm going to present some of these points as conversations that I hope people could chat chat, ask about, and that we could talk about at the end. Because even I'm not really exactly sure all the time how to interpret some of the themes that I will talk about tonight. So this gives you an overview, and let's go ahead and get started. The one thing I would like to say is when I went to see In the Heights, I am a Hamilton fan. I'm a Lin-Manuel Miranda fan. I've seen him in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Curb Your Enthusiasm, everywhere that I can. I find the work that he does very exciting, especially as someone who studies Latin America and Latinx culture in the United States. So when I went to see In the Heights, I also really made this connection with my own research. And I write, as Hannah so nicely introduced, about me with the popular culture and theater in Buenos Aires, Argentina in around 1910 to 1920. And when I saw In the Heights, I just was very struck by the fact that this was my plays brought to life. My plays take place in an immigrant city. They use urban space very well. They're usually taking place in patios or in cabarets. This is tango as part of it. So dance is certainly a big part of what I see in my plays, and also in storefronts. So all of these urban spaces where a lot of people of different ethnicities come, they fight, they, date each other, they have romances. And you could also see too, there is some problematic racial depictions. The idea of people being cast in ways in which is not fitting with the characters is certainly the case in these plays. I don't know if you can tell, but some of these actors actually wearing blackface to depict Afro-Argentines. There were always casting controversies as Spanish actors tried to portray Argentines. So the history that I'll talk about towards the end of casting controversies in the Heights goes back, and I certainly see it in my own research. So that was just one of the connections that I made with the film In the Heights, was just this kind of urban immigrant popular culture. Just to give you a little background too, I'm really focusing on the film, even though I just talked about theater, In the Heights. And again, for those who don't know, Hamilton was Lin-Manuel Miranda's biggest, amazing blockbuster hit, but it is also after he wrote the music and play In the Heights. And so this is a little bit of a timeline for In the Heights. It was performed first at, I think, Wesleyan University, where Lin-Manuel Miranda went. And then it was off Broadway, it toured, and then it became a movie in 2021 after Hamilton had made the big splash that it still has impacted theater to this day. So, but I'm going to really concentrate more on the movie than on the play, and those decisions that were made to transfer play to film will not be a focus so much as kind of the urban history. I also don't know my film buffs out there, but the film In the Heights is directed by Jonathan Chu, who many may know also directed Crazy Rich Asians, which is a similar kind of immigrant rich theme story, but told with the elite upper social class. So Jonathan Chu is an immigrant or child of immigrants, I think is also an important part of the story as he directed In the Heights. And I had to bring in, I heard him interviewed on the radio, and I had to bring in this little fun fact about the director. He and his sister were actually named after characters in this TV show that must have been from the 70s or 80s, from when he was a kid. But it is a story that I hear as I have students who also do sometimes oral histories and interview immigrants, that they're learning how to partake in American culture through popular culture, especially TV. So I just found this interview with Jonathan Chu to be a very typical kind of immigrant story. He got his name from American popular culture, and that is certainly part of what he brings to his story making in films. So the film In the Heights, I thought would be great to talk about for Hispanic Heritage Month because it is a celebration. In an era in which we've had a lot of really rough politics about immigration, we have debates all the time, and currently, which I again will return to, about who can be in this country, how one gets to be in this country. It is an ongoing theme that's often treated more negatively than positively. So I just thought the idea that this film as a musical, as a celebration of many different cultures from Latin America and the Caribbean was something to highlight. It's also very easy to kind of criticize the film, but I think sometimes we forget how to just appreciate some of the more positive images and themes that the film underscores. So in particular, it's a film about working class immigrant life in a neighborhood of New York City, Washington Heights, that is undergoing rapid change, gentrification. The big themes have to do with home. What is one's home as an immigrant? And Usnavi, who is the lead actor, this is a character, Anthony Ramos plays him, has a dream of returning to the Dominican Republic. That alone is a dream that is interesting to think about, because often immigration, the stories that one hears is people wanting to come to the United States. So I find that's also somewhat noteworthy, is that he wants to go back to the Dominican Republic to run the store that his father ran before his father died. So the true story of immigration is kind of more complicated. They present a binary. Often immigrants move temporarily to one country and then move back to another country. That was certainly the case of people in Argentina in my time frame, where they were often called golondrinas or swallows, birds who migrated, who moved back and forth. So this binary of Usnavi's dream is not always in keeping with the way immigration plays out. His love interest here is Vanessa. She dreams a more maybe typically immigrant dream, and that's just upward mobility, but not moving too far away. She wants to leave Washington Heights for a place, a different part of the city, which will give her more opportunity to flourish as a fashion designer. Her dream is to do fashion design. So the big themes have to do with neighborhood, community. I really think they highlight small business ownership of immigrants in a really beautiful, interesting way, to show how important these businesses are to the running of the city. Upward mobility, which is a pretty typical theme in immigrant stories. Sueñito or dream and dreamers, and dreamer referring to the political Dream Act, which was applied and is always debated and changing depending on the current political moment, allowing people who are brought to the US as minors to have temporary status, right? To be able to legally partake in some of the benefits that they would not be able to because they came as children and were not documented. So again, and the invisible workers who keep the city functioning is another important part of the story. I think I was most excited early on when I saw the film because as a person who teaches culture, and I have explicitly moved away from using textbooks, I found the film itself was a textbook. We didn't get a lot of history in this moment, but as Usnavi is talking to this group of children about his life in Dominican and Latin American culture, he mentions a lot of women in particular who I teach about. And so that was very exciting for me to see that talked about in a film. And I know that in a typical textbook, these women would not be talked about. In fact, there probably aren't that many textbooks. I always ask my students what they actually learned about Latin America before taking my class, and it's usually quite limited. So I also just thought that this was pretty exciting to have these women, the most famous of which might be Frida Kahlo, all integrated into this film. And again, I understand film as text. The film is a textbook. It can expand. It can remind us of all of the things that we don't learn in a typical textbook. And in particular, it's not just our Supreme Court Justice here, Sonia Sotomayor, but the women that are highlighted are often performers and dancers and writers and artists. Some are political activists, but I feel that this is how we also learn about Latin American culture. And there is a part of dance in Latin American culture, which is very historical, that in the 19th century and 18th century, often African-based rhythms were made illegal to be performed in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so things like drums became illegal. And instead of drumming then, dancing and foot movements became a way to mark the rhythm. So I think it is extremely important that we include and understand performers as important historical actors, because they are keeping history alive. Rita Moreno is certainly one of the kind of most well-known actress and dancer of, she's Puerto Rican descent. I do put her whole name here because we find over time that most of these actors do transform their names and Americanize and shorten their names, right? As part of this deal to have access to an identity and roles, casting roles in the United States. I don't know how many of you know the term EGOT, but it is one of the highest awards for a performer to win an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. So she's won all of the high awards that is available to performers in general. They also mentioned Chita Rivera, and again, I put her name, Dolores Conchita Figueroa del Rivero, who is Puerto Rican of mixed parentage, but played West Side Story, the role of Anita, who Rita Moreno will play in the film on stage. And Chita Rivera is the first Latino to win a Kennedy Center honoree, a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, someone not usually talked about. So I was excited to see her discussed. We might also know Rigoberta Menchú, who is not a performer, but was a human rights activist and represents indigenous Latin America, being from Guatemala and winning the 1992 Nobel Peace Prize. So all of these women are at least mentioned and brought into a story, which is unique. The other group of women who were mentioned have a special meaning and significance to the Dominican Republic, and the Dominican Republic is the focus of In the Heights. So these are the Mirabal sisters, and they're Patria Minerva and Maria Teresa, and they defied Rafael Trujillo, who was a dictator in the Dominican Republic, who then ordered them to be killed. And the three of them were all murdered in 1960. Since then, the UN has declared November 25th, the day of their murder, as the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. They also now have a street named after them in Washington Heights. And I was there this summer and was able to see that street name, which again is really significant because usually streets have been historically named after perhaps the presidents, not after the immigrants or the victims of dictatorships. So this is also significant in the film, the history of the film. The Mirabal sisters were made more famous or introduced further to the United States with Julia Alvarez, who is a Dominican American writer whose father opposed Rafael Trujillo, and she wrote and has written and continues to write novels about the Dominican Republic. So just in this way, I think the film was exciting. It was adding information in a textbook, information that's usually not in a textbook, to our story of the Dominican Republic and of Latin America in particular. And that is certainly highlighted in the Heights. I also, though, want to mention that I teach urban history and urban film, and that this is an extremely urban film. So I wanted to highlight a little bit of the way in which the movie intersects with urban life. Watching the film, which I did again very recently, I was struck by how many references there are in the film to the smells and the sounds of Washington Heights. But the film itself has also impacted New York beyond Washington Heights. So I wanted to just give a couple examples or references to that here. So in the Heights, the film was actually had an exhibition at the Hispanic Society of America in Upper Manhattan. The Hispanic Society of America is also attached to a college, a private college that is designed to serve and educate, especially Puerto Rican students, but also other Hispanics. So this exhibition that I was able to see focused on the history of the film from the time it was a play until it was a movie. But it did so in a huge building that had reached this height of Spanish kind of culture and history in the late 19th century. And this building and the Hispanic Society of America is now telling very different stories in that space about the Latino, Hispanic, whichever term you choose to refer to, this Latin American descent population that lives in New York today. So a couple examples of that. These are the posters that were shown. There was a whole collection of posters inside the museum. But outside the museum, there was a lot of murals, which again is an art form that is very much embraced and somewhat typical of Latin American art. That was more political in meaning, and that cast the United States as an empire, cast Spain as an empire, and reminded everyone in this upper right image of the fact of the diversity of what it means to be Hispanic or Latinx in the United States, and the growing political power of this group, which is part of that story. The exhibition that was outside was also supporting a documentary that was called Siempre Luis, about Lin-Manuel Miranda's father, Luis Miranda, and his own upward mobility as he moved to the United States and raised his son there, who's now become an important cultural force in his own right, the son, Lin-Manuel. Also outside is a reminder of the demise of the Spanish power in 1898. 1898 is when Puerto Rico and Cuba fall into the path or the hands of the United States as well, with the end of the Spanish-American War. So I found that very intriguing, that this building that was kind of dedicated to to look at it, looks like it's celebrating the height of power of Spain, is also now reminding people in New York who come to visit about the demise of Spanish power, the demise of empire, and that connection that's ongoing with Puerto Rico as a colony of the United States, or an unincorporated territory that dates from 1898 to the present. So there were lots of stories being told, not only about the film In the Heights, which really focuses on the Dominican Republic, but also on the Spanish-American history. So now I also want to transition, at least someone to do the right thing. I still want to keep in with the urban space, but it was difficult for someone of my generation to watch In the Heights without making a lot of connections to the Spike Lee movie, Do the Right Thing. And I was reminded that Do the Right Thing, when it came out, was also an extremely controversial movie for choosing to show the violence attached with different ethnic groups. So both of these films take a gentrification of the city's kind of transformation from a working class neighborhood to a whiter, more expensive elite neighborhood as one of their main themes. Do the Right Thing, however, deliberately focuses on the tensions of the different ethnic groups, in particular African Americans and Italian Americans. Whereas In the Heights is less about tensions and more about the camaraderie of all of the different Latin American populations who live in Washington Heights. Do the Right Thing is set in Brooklyn as it's gentrifying, and it is, again, attached to tension, especially between these two ethnic groups that I mentioned. The film ends with rioting, and in some ways, the kind of prescient depiction or view that Spike Lee had of the death of an African-American character, Radio Raheem, as he gets caught up in the riot and he is killed by police. Spike Lee will later do documentaries about police violence in New York, especially about Eric Garner as well. So this was kind of prescient, but he's focusing on urbanization as violence and creating tension, whereas In the Heights doesn't do that. And it takes a different shift. So I just also wanted to say, though, that it caught my attention as I was in Washington Heights in August, that I would see this graffiti artist, this is Snowman, who painted ice boxes all throughout the city of Washington Heights. I saw these all throughout Washington Heights, making, again, this explicit neighborhood reference to the Spike Lee movie, Do the Right Thing. So Snowman is a New York City-based artist with roots in graffiti. He is, I wrote here, is known for his greedy aesthetic and raw depiction of quintessential New York people, places, and things. Also on here is, again, this is from the summer, a reference to Do the Right Thing in Washington Heights, this urban connection being made. Also, I had to look up who Taki 183 was. And, you know, bless Snowman. Snowman knows his history, because I found that Taki 183 was an original graffiti artist from 1971 who was a teenager at the time and would use graffiti to express, himself and his kind of artistry and culture in New York before graffiti was cool. So it was when it was dangerous. It was not known as street art, but it was graffiti. So Snowman here is making all sorts of references to graffiti, urban culture in the Heights, right? This was in the Heights. And I'll come back to that graffiti in a second. For anyone who has seen Do the Right Thing, this is a kind of maybe the most famous scene, where this character named Buggin' Out is going home and he gets run over, his white sneakers get run over by John Savage, the actor, who represents white gentrification, has a fancy bike, and runs over Buggin' Out's white sneakers. So the white sneakers become a symbol of gentrification. And this, for those who like Breaking Bad, this is Gus, Giancarlo Esposito, an amazing actor in Breaking Bad. So I was, of course, pleased to see that In the Heights did not miss its moment. The white sneakers that are scuffed in Do the Right Thing actually become painted on. This is Vanessa, who is out, and Graffiti Pete in the Heights drips his paint on her shoes as he is painting, not as a criminal act, but as a creative act in the city in the Heights. So the meaning of street art has really shifted. And in fact, in the Heights, it is this moment of paint dripping that inspires Vanessa, who is an inspiring fashion design artist, to realize that she wants to make clothing that represent this graffiti urban aesthetic. And so she takes all of the cloths that were dripped on, that Graffiti Pete was just using to clean up, to turn it into art. So again, we see this reference, whereas in the Do the Right Thing, this was a moment of tension and violence. The same kind of idea of scuffing white shoes turns into this moment of creativity in the Heights. So I'm probably going a little too long, so let me just make a few other connections. This is the background of Do the Right Thing. This is Radio Raheem. And you notice all of the flags that are in Do the Heights, marking the space and marking the different space of different cultures in this region. So urban spaces, flags, heat, fire hydrants, graffiti, these are all motifs represented by Do the Right Thing that are also embraced by In the Heights. However, it is more pointing towards ethnic unity in the Heights. And in fact, one of the final songs of In the Heights is about raising your flag. Raise the Dominican flag, the Puerto Rican flag, the Mexican, the Cuban, right? This kind of sense or idea of ethnic community. That is a strength, not a tension. A couple other urban spaces that I'll point out, and I really, for another spectacular scene of In the Heights has to do with a dance number with hundreds of extras in the actual pool that is in Washington Heights. And it is a clear riff on the 1944 musical, water musical of Esther Williams, right? These synchronized swimming extravaganzas. So I am not sure if what to exactly make about this, because in some ways, we also know these musicals that Esther Williams was in the 40s were very white. And we also know that pools were segregated much of the time. Public pools were segregated. So this In the Heights, to me, again, was this joyous reclamation of urban public space. And this was a fantastic dance number as people in Washington Heights of all different hues, colors, ethnic backgrounds embraced the pool, the public pool, as theirs. There's also another wonderful dance scene which takes place on the side of buildings, referencing, for me, an early 1950s dance scene from Fred Astaire, which was a spectacular dance scene. But here in the Heights, it moves it outside to embrace or highlight the building, the architecture, the bridge, and the beauty that is Washington Heights, I believe. So again, this urban feel to a musical genre. The salon, I will point out, is also an important setting for In the Heights. And I just am highlighting here, these are the salon ladies, Stephanie Beatrice, and their background, right? And this is Daphne Rubin Vega and Dasha Polanco. So these are the salon ladies. And the salon is a very important urban space as well in the Dominican neighborhood. And that is highlighted. And it is also highlighted because the song that is sung in the Heights is talking about how the salon has to move due to gentrification. But again, it's not tension. It's not really political. In the song No Me Diga, the salon owner says, when someone says, I can't go 3 more blocks to visit the salon owner says, our people survived slave ships. We survived Taino genocide. We survived conquistadores and dictators. You're telling me we can't survive the D train to the Grand Concourse, as the salon will move to the Bronx out of Washington Heights. And I was just struck by that. As kind of in Latin America, there's a lot of immigration and mobility. And here it wasn't a political statement of we're gonna fight it. It's just like, we're gonna move because that's what we've had to do historically. Also, they get in a little bit of history, and that is to remind the audience that this small island, which I'll show again at the end, which is in here, an island called Hispaniola, of which the Dominican Republic and Haiti exists today, did have devastation of the Taino indigenous population and the arrival of vast numbers of people who were enslaved in the slave trade. So we have a little history there to remind us of the survival of the working class people that we're looking at. I also want to say that the salon is important because it is also, for Dominicans, a signifier of race. And this is where I want to kind of make a few points. The main point being that race will be different in the Dominican Republic and how we understand race and racial identity than it is in the United States. For Dominicans, hair is the principal bodily signifier of race, followed by facial features and then skin color, and last ancestry. And I just put in these two images of one of the main actresses, the only one of the main cast who is considered Afro-Dominican. That's Leslie Grace. And she is a student who ends up going to Stanford, but really struggling with adapting, with leaving her home in the Washington Heights and adapting really far away and facing discrimination. The film shows her when she comes back from Stanford with straight hair, but as the film continues, as she readapts to her Dominican culture, her hair is curly. And I don't know if an audience would get that, but that is how important the salon and the hair is in the Dominican community. I also want to say that there's another way in which the film has probably helped shape gentrification, and that is over the last couple of months, the first Target, the first kind of big box store opened in Washington Heights. And they hired, perhaps because of the influence of Lin-Manuel Miranda and the success of In the Heights, an artist to depict murals in the Target. And I just wanted to show how important these spaces are, that the two of the main areas of the murals that are figured in Target in Washington Heights have to do with a barber shop and the Dominican style salon, the beauty salon. And this is a picture of the artist here who depicts these iconic images. So again, the film is urban, it shapes the urban spaces and celebrates the urban spaces as well of Washington Heights. So let me now, because I am talking pretty long, I'll try to wrap it up. I just want to make a few points, and maybe I could talk through those points rather than show all of my slides. But the film, it tried to embrace a diversity of actors from Latin America. It casted for wide representation, but it still received a lot of flack for not having an strong enough or a visible enough dark-skinned Afro-Latin American cast. So what can I wanted to just say, I am still trying to think about this because, again, I'll go, these are some of the actors: Cuban, African-American, Mexican. They are largely light skin. Mark Anthony, born in New York to Puerto Rican parents, has a great small role. But there's a tradition that we may know about that has musicals as a very white genre. So part of me feels that there was this history that was so deep into the genre, it was maybe hard to break out of. The most famous is Carmen Miranda, who is Brazilian, but the #1 actress in the 1950s in the United States. Born in Portugal, Brazilian, dominated musicals in the United States. She, in her image, takes over the actual attire of the Bahian market woman in the Afro-Brazilian region of Brazil. And these are pictures and postcards of Bahian women who often use a headscarf to carry a tray or basket on their heads. That image got whitened deliberately through the characters that Carmen Miranda would play in these Hollywood musicals that were made for an American audience. When I saw Katy Perry's outfit in 2009, I thought this is the ultimate whitening of the Bahian image, as Katy Perry is a fruit basket and comes out of a banana, all of these references to Carmen Miranda. So within that genre of musicals, there is a whiteness that is kind of built in and that the film was aware of and pushed back against to a certain extent. There's also a long history of brownface and blackface in Hollywood. And I do want to say that that has shifted because the public has demanded that it shifts. In 1992, a well-known Chicano film director, theater activist, Luis Valdez, tried to make a film about Diego and Frida. starring this actress who I don't even know if we know now, but she was a big hit at the time, Lara San Giacomo, Italian-American actress. People were so upset by that casting of an Italian-American for Frida Kahlo that he could not make that film. 6 years later, it was made with a Mexican actress, Salma Hayek, who's also part Lebanese, in the lead role. That film, however, was also made with a European, Alfred Molina, playing another Mexican, Diego Rivera. So things were not entirely perfectly represented, but there we were. There is reference to Afro-Cuban religion in the Heights. This is Abuela Claudia, and all of the actors are making some reference through their outfit in white to different gods in the Santeria religion. So I'm going to skip over this, make that point. And I guess, maybe I could kind of sum up a little bit by saying that the public is the one that pushes forward these conversations about race, representation, and casting, but it is a very complicated question to have. And I was wondering about the extent to which the questions about casting Afro-Latinos is a US conversation more than a Caribbean conversation. Race, it's not a scientific fact, but a social, cultural, and ideological construction, a set of ideas through which societies have sought to organize, structure, and understand themselves. And the Dominican history of race and racial identification is not one that has embraced Blackness. That this is a group that has defined itself via its history, and that history has often had US intervention. It shares an island with Haiti, and it had a Spanish colonial past. So Dominican identity is embrace the term Indian, to be in opposition to a white Spanish or a Black African identity. So I just wanted to say that the idea that Afro-Latino would mean the same thing in the US as in the Dominican Republic is something that we want to think about maybe more closely. So race is complicated. This is from a Pew, a query, right? A poll. And when asked directly about their race, only 18% of Afro-Latinos identified their race or one of their races as Black. So again, this different kind of meaning of race is something we also have to keep in mind. I think that the US has such a strong, powerful grasp on this binary one drop rule of race that we assume everyone shares that same ideology, which is not accurate. So even scholars will disagree about what it means to be Dominican in terms of race. Jose Moya has written that, in the US, we constantly describe Dominicans as overwhelmingly Afro-descendant and chastise them for denying the African component of their DNA. Yet studies show that possibly the European component of DNA is higher than the African. So there's no one clear answer on what it means to be, how to identify racially if you are Dominican from the Dominican Republic. So I would just like to maybe end with the idea that I was thinking a lot about the Dominican Republic as I put this together. But last week, for those who followed the news, you might recall that there was a lot also going on about thousands of Haitians, migrants, who were coming through South America and other parts of Latin America to the Texas border. And as I was putting this together, I said, well, there was a lot of discussion about Haitians as getting different treatment because of being Black, because of their Blackness. And that led me to come back to the Dominican Republic and come back to this historical anomaly, maybe, of this island called Hispaniola, that in 1492 was the first settlement of Europeans in the Americas took place here. This was where Columbus focused his 4 trips between the Americas and Spain, as he didn't quite know where he was. and the history that has shaped and created this island, where we now have two very different groups existing in terms of racial, ethnic, and European heritage. And I just want to return back to this history of Hispanic Heritage Month, which was really centered out of Texas, which had a large Mexican population or Mexican American population, and California, which again, the focus was Central America and Mexican. And I just wonder if the public will demand that we eventually change Hispanic Heritage Month to something different that would actually include an awareness of the complexity of these regions in the Americas. I might advocate to celebrate Latin American and Caribbean Heritage Month. I'm not sure, but it will be interesting. I think all of these questions about race, identity, location that are brought up within the Heights will be continued to be moving forward. And I know that for sure, because when I was researching this, I read a kind of snarky comment about race and representation in the Heights on the New York Times. And this writer who wrote a comment about the article ended it with something I will share next, which was, if people are upset about casting for In the Heights, just wait till they see the casting in the new West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg, which is coming to a theater near you on December 10th, 2021. So I look forward to having more conversations about race and representation after December. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And, you know, I think it's really telling that you ended on West Side Story, because our audience wants to ask you about some of the parallels between In the Heights and West Side Story. So for the audience out there, if you would like to ask a question, now is your opportunity. You can put your question in the chat box or the Q&A box, and you have a little bit of time to do that while I ask our first one. And that comes from Coral. Coral writes, do you have any thoughts on the parallels between In the Heights and West Side Story, where male characters want to return home, but the female characters want to remain in the US?
Ooh, a gender question. That is a great question. Yeah, that is an interesting. I hadn't quite made that connection. And I will say my West Side Story is a little bit rustier right now. I do know there's definitely gendered elements. I was actually thinking within the Heights, there's been criticism that In the Heights ends with this kind of like nuclear family ideal, and maybe that Vanessa, who ends up marrying the lead Yusnavi and staying put, has made the greater sacrifice. So I find that I'm not sure if I have a great answer, but I do feel there was a lot of gendered elements of Latin America and the stories where the women are kind of in a way like propelling the story forward. I mean, I found it interesting that they highlighted all the female icons of Latin America and not the male icons. In the Heights, Vanessa has to go over and over to be the assertive one to get Yusnavi to understand that he needs to stay with her. So I'm not sure. I will have to think about that. The nostalgia for longing gets kind of gendered, then it turns masculine, that maybe the men have the harder time adapting, or the men have that kind of more idealized connection to home. I would also say that men in an immigrant community might also face more of the challenges of masculinity and violence than women. In the Heights, they talk about the abuela Claudia, who sings this beautiful song at the end, Patience and Faith, as being this invisible woman who, isn't it great that a woman in a housecoat sings an aria in the center of this movie, an older woman in a housecoat, right? That's the character figure that we overlook. But I would say there might be something that was a little maybe more freeing and being overlooked in terms of gender than being a young man in this kind of masculine public space, which fighting and bravado propelled you to fairly difficult adaptation process. So I guess that's what I would think.
Coral wrote in to add, perhaps women have more freedom in the US than in their traditional Catholic home countries.
Yeah, I'm wrestling through this in a class that I'm teaching now. At the end, we're going to look at these iconic female figures. We're going to say, why is it my students don't know Diego Rivera? He was the one who was super popular in his moment. They know Frida Kahlo. They don't know Juan Diego Perón. They know Eva Perón. Even the Virgin of Guadalupe. Like, there are these iconic female characters and figures that are highlighted. And yeah, there is something about breaking through that mold, or there was enough space within these cultural paradigms to break through. I don't know. I'm still wrestling with that, but I do appreciate that question, and I like that that idea of more freedom. And maybe, actually, I do know that Frida Kahlo was embraced by the Chicano community in the U.S., and that helped her to become kind of reclaimed as an icon. So there might be something with that as that immigration story. Thank you. I like it.
So we're talking about a movie, and I'm a librarian. We have the library audience with us tonight. Give us your recommended watch list or your recommended read list. If we really liked In the Heights, where do we go next?
Well, after doing this, I definitely want to read Julia Alvarez. All of her, I've read them a while ago, right? And Julia Alvarez, Sandra Alvaro, oh boy, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. There are, just so many. In terms of film, yeah, I feel like I really want to watch Do the Right Thing, West Side Story, In the Heights all together. And the other thing I would say that I didn't bring in here, but there's a totally different urban film trajectory in Latin America that arises out of third cinema, which is a more political cinema and film. And I would really kind of need to keep thinking about this. These musicals, which are urban, even though they may contain the violence of at least West Side Story, are kind of also embracing some of these immigrant stories in a easier to understand way than what we get when we look at Latin American cinema. So the urban film of Latin American cinema that I would recommend, with only for those who want to go down that path, is very opposite of these, would be a film called Pixote, or Pixote, Pixote, which is about street urchins in Brazil, in Sao Paulo and Rio. And it's a brutal story where they took street kids to be actors, right? They would integrate actual street kids into the cast as actors. City of God is another similar one that is set in Rio, in favelas in Rio. And there's, let's see, what was my third one? Oh, Central Station, which also, there's a lot of Brazilian and Latin American cinema which focus on urban stories. So honestly, open up any of those. I have to look around. My other, I like Americo Paredes, who writes about the border and wrote about the border. Maybe that's a little less urban. I'm looking around my class, but those will be the ones. Oh, Caetano Veloso, culture, music in Brazil. He's written a book about the Tropicalia music and movement there. So that's a good question. I'm not sure if I know I'll think of them all after I leave. Evita, you got to watch Evita if you want your musical about Latin America. So, yeah.
Kritika has written in and asked, why do you think this movie tried to be less political? When you mentioned how the people were just okay with moving the salon, wouldn't it be more impactful if it did take a political route?
And thanks, Kritika, great question. It has actually been criticized for that. And I definitely can understand it. Sometimes when I talk about the film, I want to excuse it and explain it. There is, I think the gender question is also there. I think the male characters who we might see films made about, like we used to, I guess, Viva Zapata, are the political ones. And maybe in this political climate around immigration, I mean, look, it started as a play. I would say Lin-Manuel Miranda probably wanted to celebrate, you know, the culture and people and neighborhood of the area. And honestly, it is hard to do everything. The best I could come up with, there's a lot to critique about capitalism. There's a dance scene about a lottery ticket. People are working hard, but they're also trying to win the lottery. What does that mean? Does it mean that they're not going to be able to like make it upwardly mobile just by hard work? So there might be ways in which we could address this political movement. But the best I could think with the gentrification, like I said, is that Latin America is an area where you have to move and you have to migrate, and maybe it's only 3 blocks away. And maybe that's the easier thing to do than organizing and fighting the system. It's an excellent question. That's what I mean. I didn't always have the answers to these. Like, what would a politically themed musical have looked like? Oh yeah, The Warriors is another great movie for gritty 1970s New York, street life. So that is a great question. I guess maybe when we watch West Side Story too, we could think about that a little bit. What would we have gained? How would that more of a politically inclined musical looked? So again, another great question. I am troubled a little bit with the, we'll just move on, we're getting priced out of here. But I tell you, that is a pretty basic theme in urban US. It's really hard to fight gentrification. I'm in Charlottesville. We're having so many debates about how to overcome a racist past through city planning. And everyone is just like, okay, we can change zoning, but who's going to check? It's just the developers who are going to make more money. So it's also, I would say, like a really difficult snowball to stop once it's moving, that gentrification. But great question. Think about that some more.
Well, we're about out of time for tonight, and I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Mccleary, for your time. I think it was a great presentation, and thank you to the audience for spending Monday night talking about some of these topics. I put a couple links in the chat box. The first is where you can find Dr. Mccleary online, including her publications. You have a book coming out, I believe.
Yes, but it's no date yet, but hopefully within the next year. Theater, lots of fun urban stuff.
I also put a link in the chat box to our website where you can find more Hispanic heritage resources and events. On Sunday, I'll have local small business owner Amy Duval, who owns From Politics to Pastry, teach another Bake Along at Home class. And this time we're doing tres leches cake. I cannot wait. And then my next virtual program will be on Thursday at 7 o'clock. We're going to interview lawyer Philip J. Hirschkopf about his career. For those of you who are scratching your head wondering who is Philip J. Hirschkopf, he was one of the 2 lawyers involved with the Loving versus Virginia case. So that'll be on Thursday at 7 o'clock. Thank you again to our audience, and thank you, Dr. Mccleary. Do you have any final words for our audience?
That was just a lot of fun. Be in touch. I'll come up with I need a good list for recommending. That was something I can work on. And thank you so much for listening. It is just a pleasure to be able to talk about musicals. And I really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Okay, you too.